Good morning, folks. Dr. John Taylor Kent here. It's October 12th, after breakfast, in the morning with what I call coffee. Basically, it's coffee milk. I'm going to cut back on the milk, I think, here shortly. Everything costs so much, so why not just do without for a while? Besides that, I can't believe that I'm paying $4 more for the case of condensed milk over what it was a year ago. Thank you, Biden. Look, I want to try to explain to you what a sociopath is. This is a major concept, but I'm going to make it real simple for you. Psychologists don't agree on what a sociopath is. And a lot of you folks out there run around talking about psychopaths. Well, to me, a psycho means out of touch with reality. And the sociopath is really in touch with reality. Matter of fact, they're a super predator. However, it appears as though they're not in touch, or they lack a conscience. They lack the hardwiring the rest of us have. So it does challenge the biological learning models that, well, it challenges the learning theories that I base my views on psychology for the most part, and most psychologists do. So it comes down to behavior, nurturing rather than nature. You know, is it nature, is it nurturing? Is it genetics, or is it, how you grow up? Now, I've hung out with a few sociopaths in the prisons, and I've asked them what the sources of the problems were. And the universal response I got from all of my samples was that it was caused by social upbringing, that it occurred in the social sphere. That's what the etiology of the disorder was. Now, I can go with that. That's what they like. It appears that a lot of these folks had trauma in their childhood or trauma in their past that sort of separated parts of themselves, if you will. They compartmentalized the woundedness. She went after my running shoes again and chewed it up, and I had saved one of the good running shoes because of the shoelace, and I can't figure out where I put it. And that's all she got this time was the shoelace and a part of one eyelet. Damn. At this rate, I'm going to be getting a new pair of shoes every 3 months, 2 months. It's just too much. These are kind of expensive shoes, too. Well, I'm certainly spending more money on them today than I ever spent on them before. She's at the base of my chair. I'm rubbing on top of her head. I punished her pretty harshly because she chewed up this is the second pair of good running shoes. Nike Airs. It kind of cost a bit. Sociopaths. The reason you need to know what a sociopath is because that's what you're dealing with. Those are who the people are that are running the world. They understand the rules. They understand the social norms and the rules better than you or I do. Shh. Quiet. 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 Lorraine. Down. 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 Quiet. She wants to bark. She wants to be a guard dog. No, quiet. Anyway, sociopaths aren't wired up quite like the rest of us are. They're actually a little bit more alive, and I guess in some ways we should consider them superior, because after all, they consider themselves our superiors. They run circles around the rest of us. They understand the social contract. They understand the rules governing behavior. They understand what's expected of them. More importantly, they understand what's expected of us, of you and I, of their prey, of their fish, whatever you want to call us, their suckers, their victims. They know what to expect of us, and they run circles around us and being able to manipulate and get from us what they want. There are a couple of telltale signs of a sociopath. Now, there are some people who are sociopathic, and so they've got the tendency, the traits. Sometimes those bubble up to the surface. Some of them are traits. They're pretty constant. The key thing is, though, they lack a conscience. And I really believe that the conscience is in the gut. And there's a lack of leave it alone. She found an old gallon plastic water jug and she wants to play with it. No, kennel. So we'll see how long she stays in the kennel. My shoe's right up in front of it. She better leave it alone. Kennel. Oh, like a child. The problem is we're run by a sociopathic culture. We're ruled by an organized sociopathic culture that has hidden their presence from us for millennia, for thousands of years. Kennel. Closing it. Leave my shoe alone. Yeah. Went after my shoe again. Smacked her with it. So I want you to understand that we're dealing with a sociopathic culture. And how I came to this conclusion was I dealt with sociopaths individually at first. I actually tried to marry one. Yeah, that marriage was annulled. That was quite a while back. I didn't realize what I was getting into at all. And by the time I realized what was going on, a lot of damage had occurred. And my mother-in-law was very disheartened when I called her, and she told me that she didn't know why her daughter was in the nursing profession because she couldn't love anyone. And all her mother wanted was to be part of her life. Anyway, that's more details than what I expected to tell you about. So the sociopaths, they occur at a rate of 1 out of every 25 of us is a sociopath in the United States of America, which is a pretty high rate. However, that's the old rate. That was the rate probably prior to 2005, 2006, when Martha Stout, Stout, published her book, her life work, I believe, called The Sociopath Next Door. It's written for the layperson, and a lot of what I'm telling you comes from that book. And it is an incredible book. Probably 5 decades, 50 years of practice as a psychologist went into that book. I'm just taking a guess. What I can tell you is you're run by sociopaths. They've infiltrated all of Western governments. They've been right along there, alongside of us the whole time. They are the tares that have been sown among the wheat, to put it in biblical terms. And I do mean that pretty doggone literally. I know that it's symbolic language, but the fact is that an enemy came into the field and sowed the seed. And that's quite literally what happened, is the enemy impregnated Eve, gave birth to Cain. Cain murdered his half-brother Abel. So we have these beings that walk freely among us. They know who we are. They recognize us. They size us up really well. They're quite intelligent. Some are not as bright as others. That's true. But they're still very, very dangerous. And usually they hone their craft. And by the time we run into them, they're journeyman level. They run circles around us. They set us up in their schemes, and they execute the scheme, and they catch most of us all the time. And we usually don't even realize what's happened to us. We don't recognize we've been involved with a sociopath. However, as Martha Stout says, Dr. Stout says, we might catch a glimpse of them as they walk away. So that's generally when I discover one, is after I've been had. Then I can see it pretty clearly. And of course, most of you won't see it. But I think once you've been taken by one, you're much more sensitive. As one of my friends told me, we all have our learning moment, that person by which we learn this hard lesson. The bulk of these sociopaths came out of an old country called Khazaria. Ancient Khazaria is where the Ukraine and Russia is today. It was a big country. They loved war. It was primarily Turkish-Mongolian stock. And in about 700, the Bulgar for Khazaria, the chieftain there, decided to convert his people to a religion so they would stay faithful loyal to him. So he required his nobles to convert to the same religion he adopted. And on one side of him, he had Catholics, Christians, and on the other side of him, he had Muslims. And he couldn't become one without the other side attacking him. And he realized the Jews traveled freely across the country. So he converted to Judaism because the Jews were able to go anywhere they wanted, and they were able to do whatever merchandise, whatever sort of trade they wanted to do. So he converted to Judaism, and in about 700 A.D., the Edomites, the remnant of Edom at Mount Seir, or also called Mount Edom, in the southern part of Israel. These are the descendants of Esau, who became known as Edom. They migrated up to help their newfound brothers convert to the new faith, Judaism, to help them become good Jews. Sadly, the Edomites had the Cain's blood in them. Now, it's tainted. That doesn't mean every one of them, but for the most part, they're tainted. And when they went up to Khazaria, that doesn't mean all the Khazarians became tainted for sure. So we have a residue of fallen angelic satanic blood DNA among the Khazarians. About 1100 AD, the neighbors of the Khazarians got very upset, got run off and pushed off, went west. Went next door to Poland primarily, and up to Lithuania, the Baltic states. And into the rest of the world, by the way. But they became what we call the Ashkenazi. Now, the Ashkenazi is a confusing term. I have not explored it fully myself. However, if you go in the state of Arizona to Canyon de Chelly and you take a tour, you will see the old ruins, the old buildings, the walls, and all of that the cave dwellers used to live in. These people were smaller in stature. It looked like they were running more like 4 or 5 feet tall. They were called the Anastasi and the Ashkenazi. They were the ancient ones. And so there's some overlap with that. So what I'm getting at is that it's something to be studied and learned. And somebody hopefully someday will look at that and tell us about it. But in the Old Testament, in the Bible, we have Ashkenazi. We have one of the offspring, one of the children. So there is something to be discovered by studying that. I have not gone very far into it. So those aren't strictly the only sociopaths in the world. And just to give you an indication of how bad it is in the States, because we are not homogenized, because we are so damn diverse, we have a high rate of sociopathy. 4%. You take a country like Japan, which is homogenized, and it's a stable race, if you will. It's a combination of Mongoloid and Caucasoid from Japheth, Japan. Japheth being Noah's middle son, his second son, not the youngest and not the oldest, the middle son. And the Japanese are very proud of their lineage, and they like to stay to themselves because they like to keep their people pure, if you will. They like the way they are, they like their kind, and they are not tolerant of others, and they don't race mix. And I applaud them. They've got stability. Moreover, the rate of sociopathy is quite a bit lower. 1.7%. That's way less than half of ours. However, since the Democrats have brought all these invaders in the last few decades, our rate of sociopathy has increased and is probably approaching 7%. When you mix up peoples like that, you create instability. You do not create strength in your society. You actually weaken it tremendously. And so they've been waging this kind of invasion war against us here, and they've been doing their best to change the electorate so that they can get elected perpetually. So that's why they bring in what they consider to be young, budding Democrats who will be holding to them. We never should have allowed this type of an invasion. The damage has been done, though. I would have to say that if there was the number one thing I would do if I was to become president of this country, immediately order a minimum of a 10-year moratorium on all immigration. Not even asylum seeking. None of that while we sort out what's inside of our borders. We probably need 2 decades, 20 years of it, to be honest with you. But a minimum 10-year moratorium. That's not my idea. I got that from another psychologist who helped train me up. He's actually younger than I am. Very bright fellow. Incredibly good insight. But that's one thing we need to do, is to moratorium on all immigration until we sort things out among ourselves and try to figure out what's best in our best interest. And I'm going to tell you, psychologists have helped tear this country down, so don't listen to the liberal psychologists. They're going to feed you a bunch of BS and make it worse. The psychologist family in particular is Seligman. It's mentioned in the big book. What's the big book? Not the Bible. I'm talking about the big book detailing the New World Order people. By the way, there's no New World Order. It's actually the Old World Order brought forth and repackaged and marketed as new. It's actually a remnant of devils that have been on the planet for probably, in my estimation, at least 50,000 years. Others have told me 70,000 years. So they've survived previous Earth ages, probably half a dozen of them. In case you're wondering, an Earth age is approximately 12,000 years. I think it's 11,800. I'm not real sure about that. I suffer from information overload and I can't keep it all straight. Can't remember it all. You need to know that a sociopath is not going to be readily detectable. Generally, they have one type of con, if you will, one type of thing that they play on, and they're very good at it. They're trained at it. They've probably been working on this since they were teenagers. So by the time you and I run into them in their 30s, they're seasoned. They're pros. They're not novices. As my mother told me, you wouldn't want to be had by an amateur, would you? She referred to my ex-wife as a professional. And she was. She's still alive out there somewhere. I purposely stay away from that neck of the woods that she's in because I don't want to run into her. She's dangerous. And I feel sorry for the people that run into her. I was husband number 6 that we know about. And that was back when she was 35. So she's a pretty busy girl. Pretty nasty one at that. Anyway, I'm telling you more about me than what I wanted to tell you. A sociopath has no conscience. They walk freely among us and they predate upon the rest of us. You can't beat a sociopath, according to Martha Stout. And by the way, there are some sociopaths who are psychologists. And there are definitely some sociopaths that are attorneys and medical doctors and CEOs of corporations and probably presidents of countries. I think our last one was a sociopath. This guy, I don't consider him the president. He's just a total con artist. He's a placeholder. So the last, well, I indicated the wrong one. So the Barack Hussein Obama can have his 3rd presidency. That's what we're suffering through right now. And these people absolutely will destroy this nation. And they've done a good job. And they'll destroy the world. They're very eager to start a nuclear war. They're eager to kill the rest of us off. They don't want to give up any power. They worship their father, the devil. And, you know, I know you'll say, well, who possibly would, in their right mind, would want to start a nuclear war? Well, you need to consider that these people just don't have the same spirit. They don't have the same mind. They're not wired up the same. They're sociopaths. They don't have consciences. It's like you are not that evil. You're not that bad. So you cannot comprehend them. They're outside of your realm of even consideration. As God, Yahweh, said several times in the Bible, these people were doing things that never even entered his mind. And if it's not in Yahweh's mind, it's pretty bad. So they love to sacrifice children to their god Moloch. Moloch was kind of like a calf kind of character, and they'd set up this monument, and they'd build a damn oven inside of it, and the chest would like pop out and drop down, and they'd pop the baby on it and burn it. And in case you're wondering, in 1933 in Soldiers Field in Chicago, there was such a ceremony, and they did that publicly. People were saying, well, we think it was just a child burned in effigy, in other words, just maybe a doll. But no, we think they actually had that ceremony in order to proclaim their jurisdiction over this continent. The fact that they were occupying our nation and taking us over and declaring it theirs in the name of their god Moloch. And they've taken us over. They've compromised all of those politicians in D.C. Every one of them's pretty much dirty. They got dirt on them or they aren't in office. They got videos on a lot of them doing sex acts with kids. Some of them doing some pretty violent, vicious stuff. Very much controlled population down there. It is evil beyond belief. I think one day we'll actually wall that area off and turn it into kind of a museum. Or maybe we should just bury this place. But I want you to understand that you're dealing with a sociopathic culture, and the best thing to call them, the best name is the Khazarian Mafia. These are from ancient Khazaria. And in case you're wondering, there was a Khazarian symbol, an emblem, a flag under which they waged war. And they loved waging war. And so that emblem has been risen up. Zelensky's emblem is that Khazarian emblem. Look at the unit patches on the Azimov Brigade, on all these supposedly paramilitary groups that are separate from the government and not condoned, and you will see the symbol of ancient Khazaria embedded in each one of those patches. Look at the flag Zelensky gave a recent speech in front of. It's got that old symbol on it as well. There's a specific name for it. I don't remember it. I'd have to go look it up. I probably should learn it, but I don't really like majoring in evil and wickedness. And then on top of that, they're waging war in the name of Khazaria. They're putting the symbol right in front of you. And so they're back. And that is their homelands in the area of the Ukraine, and they included a large part of Russia. And they're also trying to start the New Jerusalem there. They're trying to call that like New Israel or something as well, because they're trying to claim that. Well, it turns out the reason is because most of the people that are in Israel today aren't descendants of Israel, the man at all. They're not descendants from the Israelites. They're actually more descendants from the Turkish-Mongolian stock of the ancient Khazaria and the Ashkenazi. Look, it's all mixed up. So don't go around painting them with one broad brushstroke. And above all, don't go around telling people, well, I did that. Blame that on me. I'm telling you, it's hard to separate them out. And you've got a lot of work to do, because not only do you have the genetic DNA to be concerned about, you've got the spiritual people that go over to the dark side. You have actual Israelite descendants who actually go and decide to work for the enemy, usually as frontmen. I'm not sure what John McCain was, if he was actually really one of them or if he was just a front man. What do you think about that one? He was one or the other. And Lindsey Graham is working for them as well. Tulsi Gabbard came out saying she's leaving the Democrat Party because they're a bunch of warmongers and they're intent upon nuclear war. Well, I don't think we can avoid this nuclear war. I'm sorry. As I read the Old Testament, Zechariah in particular, I concur with Rex Tibosaurus, and he went further in the study than I did by a long shot. And just by reading over it in the general English, I can see nuclear war and biological war in there, in the future. Most of the Bible has prophecy which has not been fulfilled, and the majority of that is in the Old Testament. So read the Bible with an open mind so that you might discover the truth. Rex actually did a real good word study, and he covered it, and he's got me convinced that back then the prophets were seeing the MIRVs, the missiles, the nuclear blast, everything. They were very much aware of it and doing their best to write about it in the terms that they understood way back then. So you'll see mention about eyes melting in their sockets, tongues getting stuck in their mouths, and flesh deteriorating. You'll also see the description of a pox, if you will, some sort of a biological disease which causes so much suffering. People were praying to Yahweh, praying to God to die. They were in that much pain and agony. They were hoping to die and be released from their suffering. I think that's quite likely in our future at this point. I'm not going to blame it on Putin, by the way. I think the biological labs to do all that weaponizing comes funded right from here, from the United States of America. And why we put those in the Ukraine, that's a good question. I think Putin has cause for doing what he's doing. I think it is an existential threat to Russia, but I also think it's an existential threat to the rest of the world. The only thing is that America's too filled with dumbasses to realize what's going on. America's too dumbed down to wake up in time to save itself. So we've been taken out. We've fallen. It's just a matter of time till we actually hit the ground real hard. They are taking down the currency as fast as they can. The sociopaths are in the banking system. They're the chairmen of the board, CEOs of corporations. They're in politics in big ways. Most sociopaths aren't murderers. They just con and they just take advantage of and manipulate the hell out of everybody else. I think I've covered what I wanted to cover. We definitely are not in charge of this country. The electorate hasn't been in charge of this country since probably 1913. Quite a while. The enemies, the bad guys, have censored the literature for at least 3,000 years, according to Eustace Mullins, the author. Remember, he actually slept in the Library of Congress, I believe, for a while, or in the library in D.C. He received, I guess as a young man, he received new submissions and cataloged those, and some of those he read before he put them on the shelf, so he had access to a lot of literature the rest of us will never have access to. And as we look back, there's one group that was pretty bad. They were so bad, and they never wrote about themselves. We have no written records from the Phoenicians about the Phoenicians. The only records we have about the Phoenicians were from their neighbors, and their neighbors did not like the Phoenicians. And you have to remember that the Phoenician alphabet is the alphabet the Hebrews borrowed. So Paleo-Hebrew is the Phoenician alphabet. My hunch is that these guys were maritimers. They lived on the oceans, and that they came from Polynesia before the last Earth Age. They were the remnants of that civilization that sank over in the Pacific Ocean, or one of the many civilizations that sank at that point. And in case you're wondering, Venice definitely was founded by a bunch of sociopaths. Bad guys went there for quite a while and launched everything throughout Europe as well. They controlled most of the royalty, and they were mostly, the royalty was descended from Vlad the Impaler in Romania, Transylvania. Big Dude was one of the last of the giants. His bed, if I remember right, was way longer than anything I'd ever seen. and it's canceled. It's still there. I lost my photos, and can't remember how long the bed was. I don't remember if it was 9 feet long or 14 feet long. It was in a big room. And that castle was well maintained. I saw that in 1973-74, back when the Israelis had suckered the Egyptians into another war, had beat the Egyptians, and we weren't allowed to go visiting it, or I would have gone and visited Israel. I'd like you to buy my Bible. That's the one way you can support me and support the channel. You can also do that simple little favor of liking the video, and you can share it. Leave a comment if you like. I'm just going to keep putting up stuff as long as I can and get it out there. My last video, I combined some subjects, and I was kind of amazed that YouTube actually was open-minded enough to allow it to be posted. In that, I described how Hitler lost that war, how Hitler lost. There is some speculation that he didn't die and he didn't actually completely lose. That's almost La La Land stuff. It's for another conversation. I mentioned that the people in Berlin were dealing with the same woke culture we're dealing with. They were dealing with a lot of transgendered stuff. So in case you're thinking that it's brand new, no, it's not. And it definitely is a confusing sort of thing, and it's designed to screw society up. Excuse me. So it puts a lot of stress in society. And I didn't realize it. I knew that the Germans did book burning before Hitler came to power. But what I didn't realize is that the number one guy they burned was a guy named Hirschfeld, something like Hirschfeld. It was a doctor, and what was he writing about? Transgendered stuff. Way back then in the 30s. I think he died in about 34, 36. So when they had the book burning, I guess you and I had made assumptions that they were burning good books and they were suppressing knowledge. Well, they were going after the wokeness of their period. The Weimar Republic had super hyperinflation, which we are headed for, and it also had so many different types of prostitution that in Berlin there were 57 different names for the 57 different types of prostitution. There's some pretty good articles out there on the Weimar Republic and how back then a guy could call up the pharmacy and speak in code and get children sent to him for prostitution. Even mothers with their daughters. I mean, they could order up specialty stuff and it would get delivered to their house back then. And they had all these different names for these different combinations and different marketed prostitution sorts of things. It was pretty decadent. This time, the enemy, who is the same enemy, by the way, and occupies the United States of America and runs this government, runs all of our institutions, they're going much slower because I think they learned their lesson because they were discovered and gone after. Now, please don't tell me it's the Jews and say it's the Jews wholesale. It certainly is not. The Jews have been used. I happen to agree with Admiral William Guy Carr that the Jews have been exploited and been used and also been targeted by these bad guys. So be careful as you move forward in this and realize that it's going to be hard to sort out, that you and I aren't going to have all the answers probably ever. We'll have some. I hope we get enough stuff going so we can defend ourselves and defend our people. But these folks that are running the planet are intent upon genociding white people in particular. We are probably down below 5% of the world's population. From a peak in approximately 1936 of 33% of the world's population, we're down to definitely less than 6% of the world's population, probably down to less than 5% today, through a combination of race mixing, miscegenation is the proper term for it, and through outright genocide. especially when you consider the fact that in Russia, an easy 100 million white Christians were killed in those purges. Yeah, 100 million. That's a lot more than 6 million. I think in the Ukraine, there actually were two different genocides, and I think probably 20 million were killed there. There was another genocide of the Armenians, and somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million people were killed there. Generally speaking, they were real believers, real Christians, real Bible readers and believers. I think Arminius actually had the upper hand when it came to the argument between the theories that Arminius put forward and the theories of Calvin. Calvin's real name was Colleen, something along those lines. He was one of them. It was interesting what he come up with. Don't get me wrong, major contribution, but I think Arminius was right, and I think that genocide kind of proves it. The Young Turks went after them. Go look that up for yourself. Look up the Sabbateans as well. Those preceded those guys, and they basically believed that in order to be saved, you had to do the most wicked stuff you could do. You had to really be a real good, strong sinner in order to get salvation. Kind of a weird way to go about it. Okay, sociopaths. Oh, yes. What I'm forgetting, and probably the most important thing, is that the telltale sign of the sociopath is the pity party. So they will present themselves as if they are the victims. And there's a sociopath out there who's tracking me to this day because he knows I'm on to him. And anyway, they make themselves out to be the victims. And so they make you out to be the victimizer. And so they project usually their stuff upon the other party. Doesn't that sound like the Democrat Party today? Doesn't that sound like what the Democrats, and the rhinos do to Trump? They project their stuff on him. They claim he's in collusion with Russia, when in fact they're the ones collusion with Russia. It's such a screwed up world today. It's very complicated. So if you'd like my advice, buy the Bible, sit down and read it for the history, and let that stuff seep into you. Because life will change as you read it. You will see things differently, and you're going to see things a bit more clearly. It's hard to get a good reality check today. You might think, what's the Bible got to do with it? Well, it tells you who the bad guys are. It tells you who the good guys are as well. It tells you all of that. And I don't know how else you're going to find that out, except I'll tell you a little bit once in a while. All right, so this one's going to be sociopathy, sociopath. And we're dealing with the sociopathic culture. They illegally occupy America and run and own America today. Y'all take care. Yahweh bless America.